Hello and welcome everyone to the Do More of Your Money podcast. We've got an exciting topic this week, power of attorney, building on the back of our previous podcast on wills and when appropriate to set that up. So just going a bit more detail on power of attorney. I'm joined by some special guests today who have all been on the podcast before, but we'll go through the names. So John Mason, we've got Craig Ormond, and then we've got Sophie Bennett at the end of the table there. So welcome everyone. Folks, let's just start off with, Sophie, if I can get you just to explain what a power of attorney is, and then we'll maybe just talk about the need for it when it comes to advice. If we can just go along the panel and ask.
Sure. So power of attorney is a legal document that essentially lets somebody else act on your behalf. So the power of attorney we're discussing is about financial affairs. So it can be set up for a few reasons, and there's a couple of different types. So a type, where you can revoke it, which is sort of an ordinary power of attorney that might be set up for a temporary reason. Maybe you're going to travel abroad, or you're going to be in hospital for a long period of time and you want somebody to take care of those affairs. And like I say, it can be temporary or it can be revoked. And then you've got a lasting power of attorney, which you can set it up while you are a full mental capacity, but it's supposed to be lasting. So it might just be that you want that extra helping hand with your financial affairs, or it might be that unfortunately you've lost mental capacity and you need somebody else to be able to look after things for you.
And it's important, Craig, when have, as an advisor, when have you seen these in place before, and when would you sort of recommend clients to consider this?
I think to answer your second point there, I think the sooner you get them in place, the better. With similar to your finances, the more pragmatic you are with your estate in its entirety, the better you're going to be over the long term. So we've seen clients put them in place, 40s, 50s, wherever it may be, just so if anything happens and the worst case scenario occurs, there's plans in place and set out for your family, and that almost kind of lightens the load on those who are having to do things on your behalf. So they're really, really beneficial. I can even speak personally where I've had family members who have maybe got older, suffered from a dementia or whatever it may be, and they're not in the position to deal with their finances. So having somebody pre-appointed there to take care of their affairs is fundamental to the kind of longevity of their estate and being pragmatic with their finances forever.
Yeah,
so really important.
And it can be more, I think the key is you don't know whether you need this or you don't need it in some respects, and it can be very difficult if, for example, you get diagnosed with dementia or other things to prove why you need it. So I think it's quite important to think about it. Now, I helped my granddad a few years ago now, where he set up a will, and it was one of the questions asked about setting up a power of attorney, and at the time we set my sister as the power of attorney. That become incredibly helpful later on in life, and my granddad wasn't necessarily incapacitated. He was still very much of sound mind, but it allowed him to get his sister to help him and support him, especially in that later life. So it's not just necessarily for those needs; it can actually just to be helping.
Yeah, I think it's one of them things. It's better to have it and not need it. They need it and not have it, and you're right in that. It's not just there for when you lose capacity. People think, I need it in case anything happens. Actually, you might just get to the point in your life where you need a bit of assistance, and it's already taken care of. And it becomes far harder to have those conversations when something's occurred than already having it in place. So, again, pragmatism is always going to win in this circumstance.
Yeah, it's a key one. And how do we set this up, Sophie, John, in terms of how we set up a power of attorney? What would you typically do?
Yeah, so for a power of attorney, you would fill in an application and send it off to the government, usually around £82 to register a power of attorney. Now, from our point of view, from an advice firm and from a product provider, if we want to take instructions from someone who has a power of attorney in place or from their power of attorney, we just need to see a copy of the document. So if you could probably expand on the requirements that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would need to see, once that power of attorney's been, given to you and granted, it's important to know that once you've sent that form off, it actually can take sort of up to 20 weeks to get it in place. So I think that just reiterates, like Craig said, you don't want to wait until something happens and then be in a position where nobody can help you for months until that comes through. But once you've got that, you just need to send that to ourselves, a certified copy along with some ID, so a photographic and a proof of address, and then just confirmation of your national insurance number, and we essentially hold all of that on our system. And it essentially just means that whenever your power of attorney calls in or writes in, we'd be able to deal with them as if it was you. And having that on our side is really, really important, because it stops any, confusion, and it just means that you can get the help that you need through yourself or your power of attorney.
Sophia, another one for you. Can you have more than one power of attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. You can have as many as you like. And I think sometimes that can be quite useful because you are sort of entrusting, you know, a lot of responsibility with somebody. So to know a few of your loved ones could sort of share that responsibility, would it be a bit more of peace of mind? If you set it up jointly, it means that whenever a decision's made, all of your power of attorneys have to agree. So if you're going to make a financial decision, they'd all have to sign off on it. You can set it up that way if you wish, but you could also set it up jointly and severally. So that means that if somebody wants to make a decision, they can do that. One of your power of attorneys can do that and go ahead with it without having the permission of all of the others. So it might be the case that, you know, they then don't have to look after everything all together. You know, they might look after separate parts, but you've got that choice yourself. If you want it to be a group decision, or if you're happy to make it as individuals, then you've got that peace of mind because you've chosen.
It's quite useful as well on that basis, because it could be a big decision for just one person to make, and you know, if you're the power of attorney, you might not want to make that decision about someone else's money. So having that jointly option, you know, in terms of saying it could be, you know, sons and daughters or whoever. I think that's quite a useful thing to look at.
I think as well, on who can be a power of attorney. Obviously, you can have as many as you want. There's a couple of rules. So you've got to be over 18. You've got to have sound mind yourself as an attorney. And importantly, you don't just have to be UK based. So let's say you've got 2 children, one lives abroad, one lives UK. You could actually still have both. So it's not just tied to the UK in terms of being an attorney. So there's a couple of rules, not many, around who can actually be an attorney.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm just going to take a step up for this because I mentioned before about wills, and I always think it's a good opportunity to talk about this, about the importance of setting up a will. And these normally they tend to come hand in hand. When you set up your will, you tend to go through your power of attorney. But I don't know, Craig, we can just go through, let's just re-emphasise that in terms of why is it such an important thing to set your will.
Again, it just comes back to the pragmatism of that. And I think if you're getting in a good practice of dealing with a solicitor, putting a will in place, at the same time, you pretty much killing 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of doing the power of attorney and will at the same time. And again, it gets stuff in place. What you don't want to do is not have a will in place, at which point your estate would fall into intestate or intestacy, which means, you know, it's a long, drawn-out process, a formal process which can't be altered. The repercussions of that could be your estate doesn't go to where you want it to be to go, but also delays probate and that sort of thing at the same time. So again, getting them in place, a will and a power of attorney, is just good practice, especially when you're dealing with people who are maybe later in life as well. Just very good practice to do that. And
you're never too old to start a will. I think this is a classic one we hear quite often in certain things is, you know, I'll do that when I retire, or, you know, I'll set that power of attorney when I retire. And actually, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. You just don't know. And just having that security in place is an added benefit, especially when it comes to, you know, from a financial advisor perspective, giving you sound advice. We would always look to recommend that.
I think what is probably important to touch on that as well, you can amend a will and you can actually also amend a power of attorney.
Exactly.
You know, there is a small cost to doing that, particularly with the attorney side of things. But if you're still sound of mind, and let's say you're set up when you're younger in your life, there's nothing stopping you at age 50, let's say, reassessing your scenario. Things might have changed. You can alter it at that point. Again, just having it in place is a huge benefit for clients.
And I think just a bit of a plug, we do have a podcast from previously where we kind of go in a bit of detail with a lady from Wimbledon Dickinson who talks about wills, etc. And I would recommend anyone to watch that if you haven't thought about setting up a will, because it's important. It talks a little bit about power of attorney as well from that perspective. In terms of ongoing benefits, John, this is obviously key as we're giving financial advice to someone. If somebody does become incapacitated, you still want to ensure that they're getting sound advice, things such as bedding in ISAs every year, so moving money from GIAs to ISAs, or ensuring the products are still suitable. That power of attorney is equally as important in that case as well, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of financial advice is around tax planning. It's about, you know, potentially estate planning, making sure that when your estate does eventually pass to your family members, whether that's in line with your will or to whoever you want it to pass to, making sure that it does so in the most tax efficient way. Now, you can put planning in place during your lifetime, certainly while you still have capacity, but if there does come a point where you lose the capacity to make financial decisions, you don't want all of that tax planning to stop, and you don't want it to you don't want to be in a position where your estate can no longer be dealt with in a tax efficient manner. So by having that lasting power of attorney in place, you've got a trusted individual who can continue to deal with that sort of thing. You've mentioned examples already, putting money into an ISA, arranging your estate in such a way where it's going to be passed on tax efficiently. And I think what you certainly don't want to be doing is, you know,
if an event happens where you do lose mental capacity and you don't have a power of attorney in place, you don't want your family members sort of scrambling around trying to deal with things in a way that's a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. You know, if you don't have a power of attorney in place and you were to lose capacity, they would have to approach the Court of Protection to apply for a deputy to be appointed on your behalf. And I think by having the power of attorney in place, it just allows all of that financial planning and tax planning to continue seamlessly after any event does take place.
I would just add to that as well in terms of the deputyship John talked about. The power of attorney is relatively cheap and simple in terms of setting up. The deputyship through the court protections is a lot more laborious administrative process with a lot of legality associated with that. Not only that, a cost as well. You know, speaking personally, my own family, if I had to try and set up a deputyship, and it takes a long time. A lot of forms have got to be done correctly. If they're not, it leads to further administrative problems. So again, the power of attorney just saves all that headache when it is too late. So it is a big thing. Yeah,
no, I think it's a really important thing to consider. And I think one of the areas John was kind of touching on there was in terms of your family. And I kind of, we've had these discussions before on podcasts, but for newer viewers, I think one of the important things that we recommend all of our clients to do is have discussions where appropriate with their family around, you know, in terms of where potential assets are and potential why it's important to save, etc. And we do have a bit of functionality within our technology that will help with that, don't we, Sophie? I don't know if you can explain a bit about that.
Yeah, we absolutely do. I think it is really important. I know it's not an easy conversation to have sometimes, you know, about what happens to your funds in the future, and, you know, it can be a bit of an awkward situation, but actually it saves so much hassle later down the line. So like Craig mentioned there about the deputyship, you've then also lost control over who that's going to be. If you set up a power of attorney yourself, you know, you're choosing your trusted family members, you can have more than one, and it's still in your hands then. And I feel like that's what we do with our beneficiary service too. So we let you choose your beneficiaries, you can pop those details in on the site, and then, you know, when that time comes, we can contact them. You can even give us their information and tick a box to say you can contact them now. And all we do is we just reach out to let them know that, you know, they're an intended beneficiary. It doesn't give them too many details, but it lets them know who we are. And then when that time comes, they know to get in touch with True Potential. And we've got our beneficiary service to, you know, extend that helping hand. But it is really important. And I think, you know, you've then got that peace of mind that your family know how to deal with it when things do progress.
Yeah, I think it is. I had a discussion with a client. I think I've mentioned this a few times. It's an own client of ours now. Her father was an advisor with us before, and we were kind of helping her sort out this estate afterwards. I just said the most important part of that process was our dad. He sadly had cancer, and he was dying, but he was able to sit down with the family and just explain where everything is, how he managed their money. He wanted to make sure in terms of the household, in terms of making sure that his wife was securely. So he kind of positioned with his family how he wanted it to look. He also said there were certain elements of his business that were still with us, that, you know, in terms of us helping and supporting him manage those clients moving forward. So it was interesting because I was speaking to his daughter, who wasn't anything within financial servicing, but understood a significant amount, and that conversation really helped that family. Yeah. And I think that's a really important part of it.
It's always going to be a bit of a morbid topic,
yeah.
You know, but ultimately it's a part of life and everyone's going to deal with it. The worst thing a family can do is essentially a minefield trying to find finances, especially if you look at historical policies from the 80s and 90s, it's all paper based.
Yeah.
Yes, the individual knows where they are, but your family don't, and trying to kind of navigate that after a tragic event or a traumatic event, or even the passing of a loved one, it can be difficult enough. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
It's funny because I'm probably a bit more sort of sadder than other people, but I have everything written down on a spreadsheet that's passworded that my auntie has a copy of, and the idea behind that was anything happened to me or my wife also has a copy of that, by the way, just to be clear.
All right,
Annie, but the idea was that if anything did happen, then you where my life insurance were, then you where all my bank accounts were, all my investments and savings, etc. And it wasn't like a case of finding them. It's quite common, the amount of lost bank accounts across the UK and lost investments, lost pensions. And it tends to be down to things like this, where someone's passed away and they didn't realise it was there. So I think it's really key that you do bring your family into this. I'm not saying you tell them the pounds and pence value of everything you have. You may not want to have those discussions, but having discussions around, actually, you're going to inherit this money at some point. This is how it'll work. This is the contact details of the financial advisor that I use, and they'll help you and guide you. Because part of that, that ongoing advice piece that we deliver to our clients is to ensure that the family's looked after afterwards. And I think that's really key. Just final one on the, just going back to the power of attorney, Sophie. If any of our clients do have a power of attorney, recommend speaking to the head office so we can get that on file, because some people may have already had this set up and maybe he's not told us, because that'll obviously make life easier for us when looking after their investments.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine there can be nothing more frustrating if you have, applied for this and we're not aware of that. If you call up and we say, I'm really sorry, we can't speak to you because we've not got the details of that. So I can completely understand how that could be frustrating. Like I said earlier, if you just send us over the copy of that, the certified power of attorney document, your ID, so photographic, a passport, a driving licence, and one showing proof of address, such as a bank statement, and your national insurance number, we get that all put on our system. If you're not sure if it's on our system, you can pop us a message in or give us a call and we'll absolutely be able to confirm. But once that's there, you're all good to go, and it's there every time. But it just lets us know as well, if there's anything that crops up on the account that we feel we want to contact you for, we're then going to contact the power of attorney rather than the client on the account as well. So it is really helpful, and it just helps us help you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's important that we have a copy of that if you do have it set up. It just means that power of attorney can speak to us in the right way, and there's no concerns. We don't want to make any difficulties, but we have obviously an obligation to protect our clients. So it's important that we'll get that information. I think that probably just gives us a good summary of that. Any sort of key takeaway, folks? What would you recommend clients? So we're going to have everyone going out to set power of attorneys up after this podcast, or just consider it?
Yeah, I think it's a subject to consider, and it's something to look into. You wouldn't want anyone to be under the assumption that if you were to lose capacity, your family are just automatically able to do everything for you, because that's not the case. There's processes to go through, and something as simple as putting a power of attorney in place, naming someone who you trust to deal with your affairs, if anything like that were to happen, is it's one thing ticked off the list of things that you don't need to think about again. So,
and it's only £82, as you mentioned before, John. So
yeah, I think when you compare that with other types of legal work you can go through, solicitors, buying houses, anything else that you might want to do, those things can run into the hundreds of pounds. So to put a power of attorney in place, £82 in the grander scheme of things isn't too bad.
Yeah, I think it isn't too bad. As I said, setting up a will and setting up a power of attorney on that basis, they normally follow suit. And if you haven't got either of those set up, we would really recommend that you can consider that, specifically a will, very quickly, because as I said, that, as you said earlier, Craig, it can be really difficult, on death, and I think it's something you don't want to leave your family with.
I think just one more takeaway for me is, we talked about somebody looking after your estate. They can't just do what they want with your estate as well.
Yeah.
It's probably something that will walk past. They can't just, I'm now a power of attorney, I'll just give all this money away.
Yeah.
That is probably something to cover briefly, is that they've still got to act in your interest.
Yeah.
So it has to be a reasonable amount of money in line with what you've done previously.
Yeah.
But also if it gets to a point where it's, crossing a certain line, you are still protected by the court protection in there as well. So, the Public Office of Guardian.
Yeah.
So it's not they can do anything they want with you. They've still got to act in accord with your best interests. So that is something worth adding on to the power of attorney argument.
And if you need to set one of these up, you can go online, but you can do it through a solicitor typically.
There will be additional costs for that, yeah. But again, it means it's done right. If you do it yourself and you make a mistake, you've got to pay, I think it's £41, it's half of the initial set of price just to correct something which is wrong. You've got to reapply. So that is something worth noting as well. So
worth considering getting a solicitor to do. I think we said that about the wills, getting a good solicitor to write a will can be very important, because in terms of being accurate, etc. So brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully a nice sort of quick sort of podcast on power of attorney. If you do have any questions, or you wish to speak to any of the team, financial advisor about this point in act, please just give us a shout at head office, or speak to your financial advisor. As I said, we believe this is a really important thing to consider as an end client. Hope you enjoyed the video and the content, and that's bye for now. Thank you.